She woke up with the cold biting her fingers and toes. The city was just starting to stir, but the streets were still mostly quiet, except for the occasional car or distant footsteps echoing on the pavement. She pulled her thin coat closer around her, hoping it would block some of the chill. Her small backpack, worn and patched in several places, rested beside her. Inside, it carried all that she owned: some clothes, a notebook filled with scribbled notes and music sheets, and a few coins she had collected the day before. It wasn't much, but it was hers, and it reminded her that even when everything else felt lost, she still had something no one could take away: her music. She stretched her stiff limbs and glanced at the corner where she had spent the night. It wasn't safe. There were always people wandering around, some with kind faces, others with nothing but suspicion or cruelty in their eyes. The city streets were no stranger to harshness. Some people ignored her completely, walking by without a glance. Others whispered or sneered, assuming she had nothing to offer. She had learned not to let it bother her, though it hurt sometimes more than she admitted. She had learned to survive by keeping her head down, but she had also learned to dream quietly. Dreams were free, and no one could steal them. Finding a spot with a little sunlight was rare, but today she was lucky. A small patch of warmth hit the corner where she had been sitting, and she took a moment to let it touch her face. It felt almost like a small blessing. She pulled her notebook out of her bag and flipped through the pages. Looking at the notes she had written late at night, by the faint light of a street lamp, music was her only constant. It was the one thing that made the cold, hunger, and loneliness bearable. Even when her stomach growled and her body ached, music could fill the emptiness, even if only for a short while. Each note was a conversation she could have without words, a story she could tell without anyone asking for proof or judgment. She tried not to think about how she ended up here. It was complicated, messy, and filled with moments that still made her heart ache. Family that was supposed to care had turned away. Friends she trusted had disappeared. Life, it seemed, had a way of knocking her down when she least expected it. She remembered better days, days when she had a place to sleep and food on the table. But those memories were like fragile glass. One wrong move, one mistake, and the ground seemed to crumble beneath her. Now, she had to navigate each day with careful steps, learning to trust the world again while carrying the weight of past disappointments. Even in these circumstances, she never stopped practicing. Music wasn't just her escape. It was her companion, her teacher, her friend. Sometimes she would hum a tune quietly, imagining the piano she had once played in a warm, bright room. She imagined her fingers dancing over the keys, feeling the vibrations through her fingertips, hearing the harmony fill the air. On bad days, she closed her eyes and pictured herself performing for people who were genuinely listening, who could feel the emotions she poured into every note. It gave her hope that maybe, someday, she could find her place again. Hope, she knew, was dangerous in its own way. It could be crushed easily, but she couldn't live without it. Most mornings, she started by searching for breakfast. Some days it meant walking to a cafe and hoping the manager would spare leftover bread or pastries. Other days it meant finding a kind soul handing out food to people like her. Today it was luck. A woman with a warm smile handed her a small paper bag with a sandwich and a cup of tea. The simple act made her heart swell. People rarely smiled at her without reason. They either pitied her, ignored her, or pretended she wasn't there. But this woman treated her like a human being, with dignity and respect. And it reminded her that kindness still existed in the world. She thanked her quietly and took a small bite. Savoring the warmth and the feeling that she was seen, with her hunger satisfied, she wandered through the city. Keeping to the quieter streets where she could sit and play her music without interruption, she carried her small keyboard carefully, the only instrument she had managed to keep through months on the streets. It wasn't much compared to a full piano, but it was enough. Enough to play, enough to dream, enough to remind her of who she really was. She found a corner near a building where the wind didn't blow as harshly. She set the keyboard down and opened her notebook. Fingers trembling slightly from cold and nerves, she played. The music spilled out, filling the air with a melody both sad and beautiful. Sometimes people walked by without noticing, lost in their own lives. Sometimes a passerby stopped briefly, drawn by the sound, and gave a small smile or a nod. It was rare, but it reminded her that music had power. Even a few seconds of connection could make her feel alive in a world that often made her feel invisible. She didn't play for money. She didn't play for recognition. She played because it was the only way she could express herself fully. Each note was a part of her soul, laid bare for anyone who wanted to see it. Music didn't judge her, didn't care about her past, her clothes, or where she slept. Music only asked that she'll show up and give it her all. And so she did, day after day, even when hope felt like a fragile thread ready to snap. Some days, the loneliness hit harder than hunger. She would watch families walk by, holding hands, smiling, living lives she longed to be part of. She would see people rushing past with their worries and complaints, never noticing the small, quiet struggles around them. She wanted to be angry, but instead, she often felt invisible grief. It wasn't fair, and she knew it. Life rarely was. But in her music, she found a way to take her sorrow and turn it into something beautiful. The notes became her words, her voice, her story. And she clung to that, even when the streets felt cruel. Night was always the hardest. The city lights flickered, and the cold crept in through her coat, her shoes, even her very bones. She would find a quiet alley or a bench tucked away from prying eyes and try to rest. Sleep was difficult, but necessary. Dreams often mixed with memories and wishes, leaving her both comforted and heartbroken when she woke. Still, she survived. Still, she carried on. Music gave her strength, a reminder that she had a gift no one could take from her. No matter how many doors had closed, no matter how many people had turned away, even in her struggles. She found moments of beauty in small things. A street musician playing a violin, the laughter of children in a nearby park, the way sunlight glinted off the pavement after rain. Life was harsh, but it wasn't entirely cruel. It was a lesson she learned slowly, but it was one she clung to. Every day she survived was a victory, and every note she played was a small triumph. Music was her proof that she existed, that she mattered, that her story wasn't over yet, by the time evening came. Her fingers were stiff, her body tired, but her spirit had endured another day. She packed up her keyboard, tucked her notebook safely back into her backpack, and began searching for a place to rest. Some nights she slept in a shelter, if she could get a spot. Other nights she found a quiet corner and wrapped herself in whatever warmth she could find. It wasn't easy, and it was never safe, but it was home for now, and she clung to the hope that tomorrow might bring something different, something better. A kind word, a new opportunity, chance for her music to be heard by someone who could see the talent. She had nurtured in silence for so long. Her life on the streets was a constant struggle, but it was also a testament to resilience. Every day she survived, she played, she dreamed, and deep inside, she knew that her music was her way of connecting with the world, even when the world seemed unwilling to notice. One day she hoped someone would stop and listen, and maybe, just maybe, that day wouldn't be far away. The next morning began much like the day before. She woke up stiff and cold, her coat thin and threadbare, but her spirit was determined. She had learned to keep moving, keep surviving, and most importantly, keep playing. Music was no longer just a way to pass time. It had become the pulse that kept her going. Even the harsh winds of the city streets could not silence her. She carried her small keyboard with careful hands, as though it were a precious treasure, because in a way, it was. It contained every note she had ever written, every melody that had ever lifted her heart even for a moment. As she walked through the familiar streets, she noticed that the city felt different that day. Perhaps it was her imagination, but it seemed quieter, as if people were moving faster. Their faces more hurried, their eyes rarely lifting from the ground. She found her usual corner near a building, a place she had claimed over the past few months, and set up her keyboard carefully. The notebook opened on her lap, filled with scribbled compositions and melodies she had dreamed up in the dead of night. She adjusted her coat, took a deep breath, and began to play. The first few notes were tentative, testing the air, letting her fingers remember the keys beneath them. Then, slowly, she allowed herself to sink into the music. Each note carried her emotions, loneliness, hope, longing, resilience. Her fingers danced over the keys, creating a sound that was both haunting and beautiful. It wasn't just music. It was her story being told without words. The notes spoke of cold nights, of hunger, of dreams deferred, and yet of a stubborn will to survive. A few people passed by, their steps quick, their eyes avoiding her. But one man paused. He was tall, with a kind face that seemed out of place among the indifferent crowd. He listened quietly, his expression softening with each passing note. She did not notice him at first, too engrossed in the music that seemed to flow from her very soul. But then she sensed the presence of someone watching her, feeling the pause in the air. She looked up briefly and met his gaze. He smiled, a genuine, warm smile, and she felt a strange sense of connection. It had been a long time since anyone had looked at her as if she mattered. After a moment, the man stepped closer. "That was beautiful," he said softly, careful not to startle her. She blinked, unsure how to respond. Compliments were rare, and kindness even rarer. "You have a gift," he added, and it was not pity in his voice. Not the usual tone people used when speaking to someone like her. It was admiration. She nodded shyly, her fingers still resting on the keyboard, unsure if she could even speak. "I'm a cafe owner," he continued. "I have a small place not far from here. We have a piano there. Would you like to play sometime? People would love to hear you." The offer took her by surprise. She had been performing for herself for so long, thinking her music would never reach anyone else. And yet here was someone offering a chance to share her talent in a place where people could truly listen. Her mind raced. Could she trust him? Could she really play in a cafe filled with strangers who might judge her? The thought of stepping into a world she had been kept away from for so long was frightening. She shook her head slowly. I don't know," she admitted. "I'm not used to." She trailed off, unsure how to finish the sentence. The fear of rejection, the fear of being laughed at, was strong. The man smiled gently. "I understand. You don't have to decide today. Just think about it. I believe people would be amazed by what you can do." With that, he handed her a small card with the cafe's name and number and walked away, leaving her in a strange mix of hope and doubt. She stared at the card, feeling the weight of possibility. Could this be the start of something different? Something better? Or was it just another fleeting moment that would fade, like so many before? She spent the rest of the day wandering, the card safely tucked into her notebook. She played her music at her usual corner, but her mind kept drifting back to the cafe. For the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to imagine an audience, not just people passing by, but people truly listening, reacting, connecting with her music. It was exhilarating and terrifying all at once. She played with more passion than ever, as though preparing herself for something she didn't yet understand. Days passed, and the man's offer lingered in her mind. She returned to the corner, played her music, and noticed small changes. A few more people stopped to listen. Some gave a small smile, a nod, or even a coin. It wasn't much, but it was different. It was recognition, however small, and it gave her courage. Music, which had always been her refuge, was now becoming a bridge to the world. She realized that her talent had a power she had never fully understood. One afternoon, as she played, a young girl approached cautiously, drawn by the sound. She was holding a sketchbook and pencils, clearly inspired by the music. She didn't speak at first, just watched, eyes wide, occasionally sketching something quickly before glancing back at the keyboard. The woman noticed and smiled faintly, a small warmth spreading through her chest. Music could inspire, she realized. It could create connections, even between strangers, even in the coldest, hardest streets. The next day, she decided to take a small step. She walked to the cafe, clutching the card tightly in her hand. Her heart raced as she approached the door. What if people laughed at her? What if she wasn't good enough? What if this opportunity slipped through her fingers? But she remembered the music that had carried her this far. She remembered the nights she had spent dreaming of a moment like this. With trembling hands, she pushed the door open. Inside, the cafe was warm, filled with the smell of coffee and baked bread. A few people were sitting at tables, talking quietly, some reading or typing on laptops. At the back, a piano stood, polished and inviting. The owner approached her with a smile. "I'm glad you came," he said. "Don't worry about anything. Just play." She nodded, swallowing her fear. She took a deep breath and sat at the piano, her fingers hovering over the keys. For a moment, nothing happened. She could hear her own heartbeat, feel the warmth of the room, and sense the eyes of strangers upon her. Then she played, slowly at first, testing the instrument, letting it speak to her fingers. And then, as the notes flowed, she let herself go completely. The music filled the room, weaving through the air like a story being told without words. The customers paused their conversations, some closing their eyes, others leaning forward, drawn in. The sound was rich, full of emotions, sadness, longing, hope, and resilience all wrapped together. The room was silent except for the music, and in that silence, she felt seen for the first time in a long while. When she finished, the room erupted in applause. She blinked, surprised, unsure how to respond. The cafe owner's smile was proud, warm, and genuine. "See," he said softly, "people can feel it. They can see your talent." She felt a strange mix of joy, relief, and disbelief. Her music, which had always been her private world, had reached others. It had moved them. And in that moment, she understood that her gift was not just for her, it was meant to be shared. Over the next few weeks, she returned to the cafe regularly. Each time, she played a little more confidently, letting her emotions flow freely through her fingers. Regular customers began to recognize her, greeting her with smiles and words of encouragement. Some even brought friends, curious to hear the music they had heard whispered about on the streets. She was no longer invisible. Her music had given her a place where she belonged, a space where she was valued not for her appearance or circumstances, but for her talent and heart. She still faced struggles, of course. The streets had not disappeared. And she still had to think about where she would sleep at night and how she would survive. But now, there was a spark of hope, a sense that things could change. The kindness of strangers, the encouragement of the cafe owner, and the way people responded to her music were reminders that the world could be more than cold, indifferent streets. She realized that talent, persistence, and courage could open doors, even when life seemed determined to keep them closed. And as she walked home each night, her small keyboard slung carefully over her shoulder, she played quiet melodies for herself, not for applause, not for recognition, but for the joy of creating, of expressing, of surviving. The music had always been her refuge, but now it was also her connection to something bigger, a world that was starting to notice her, starting to listen, starting to believe that even a homeless woman could create beauty that left people in awe. The streets were still harsh, the nights still cold, but her heart was lighter. She had found a place where her music mattered, where her talent was seen, and where she could dream again. And for the first time in a long while, she believed that maybe, just maybe, her life could change for the better. She had been playing at the cafe for a few weeks now, and each visit brought her a little closer to feeling like she belonged somewhere. The warmth inside, the smell of fresh coffee, and the sight of people genuinely listening to her music gave her a feeling she had almost forgotten. Yet a part of her still hesitated. Outside, the streets remained cold and unforgiving, and each day reminded her of the fragile line she walked between hope and despair. She knew her life had changed in some small ways, but she also knew that opportunity could vanish as quickly as it appeared. That afternoon, as she walked toward the cafe, she felt a mixture of excitement and anxiety. The owner had approached her the day before with an idea. There was a small community event being held in the city hall, a charity performance where local musicians could showcase their talent. He thought she should play. At first, she laughed quietly at the thought. A formal stage, a crowd of people, lights, and expectations she felt completely out of place. Who would care about the music of a homeless woman? Who would even let her on the stage? Still, the seed of possibility had been planted. That night, she opened her notebook and stared at the keys of her small keyboard. She played softly, letting her fingers move over the familiar notes. She imagined herself on a larger piano, in a room filled with people, her music reaching every ear. The thought both terrified and thrilled her. She had never performed for anyone beyond a handful of cafe patrons. Here, she would be seen by strangers, some perhaps skeptical, some curious, and some who might not care at all. She had to find courage she didn't know she still had. The next morning, she met the cafe owner near the city hall. He had arranged for her to see the stage and the piano beforehand, hoping to calm her nerves. She walked in cautiously. The hall was bigger than anything she had been in for years. Rows of chairs were set up, and a polished piano gleamed at the front. Sunlight filtered in through the large windows, casting warm patterns on the wooden floor. The owner gave her an encouraging smile. "You can do this," he said. "Just play like you always do. Let your music speak." She nodded, though her stomach twisted with nerves. She had practiced countless times in her notebook, on her small keyboard, but the piano here was larger, heavier, and louder. What if she hit the wrong note? What if people laughed? The thought of failing in front of a room full of strangers made her palms sweat. But as she sat at the piano and placed her fingers over the keys, a calmness washed over her. Music had always been her refuge. No matter where she was, no matter how many people judged her or ignored her. The keys beneath her fingers reminded her of who she was. And today, she would share that part of herself. When the event began, the room gradually filled with people. Volunteers moved quietly, setting up chairs and adjusting microphones. Musicians of all kinds practiced in corners, tuning guitars, rehearsing their songs. She stayed quietly at the back, watching, listening, and trying to keep her nerves at bay. She was aware of the glances, some curious, some doubtful. She reminded herself to focus on the music, to focus on what she loved, not on what others thought. Finally, her turn came. The volunteer approached her with a gentle smile. "You're next," he said. She took a deep breath and walked to the piano, feeling the polished wood beneath her fingertips. She paused for a moment, looking at the audience seated before her. Their faces were a mixture of curiosity and anticipation. Some were kind, some were indifferent, and a few seemed skeptical. She let herself imagine them listening with open hearts, hearing the story she carried in her music. Then she played. The first notes were soft, hesitant, but they quickly grew stronger, more confident. She allowed herself to sink into the music, to feel every emotion and pour it into the piano. The room seemed to still around her. People stopped talking. Chairs shifted quietly as the audience leaned in. Her fingers moved as if on their own, dancing over the keys, weaving melodies that spoke of loneliness, struggle, and hope. She could feel the music filling the space, wrapping around the listeners, connecting with them in a way that words never could. She noticed a few people in the front row with tears in their eyes. Others nodded along, lost in the story her music told. She felt a warmth spread through her chest, a mixture of relief, joy, and pride. For the first time in a long while, she realized that her music could reach beyond the streets, beyond the cafe, and touch the hearts of strangers. It was a powerful, almost overwhelming feeling. The fear that had gripped her in the days leading up to this moment began to melt away. Music had always been her voice. Now people were truly listening as she continued playing. She remembered the nights on the streets, the cold, the hunger, the loneliness. Every note carried a piece of that life, every chord a reflection of the hardships she had faced. Yet, through the music, she also shared her resilience. People didn't just hear sadness. They felt hope. They didn't just see struggle, they witnessed strength. And in that moment, she realized that her past, with all its pain, had shaped the music that was touching the audience. When she finished, the silence lingered for a heartbeat, almost as if no one wanted to break the spell. Then, slowly, applause began. Hands clapped, some people stood, others smiled and whispered to their neighbors. The sound filled the hall, loud and genuine, and for the first time, she felt a deep sense of accomplishment. She had done more than play music. She had shared a part of herself, and it had been received with kindness and respect. After the performance, people approached her. Some asked questions about her music. Others complimented her skill, and a few simply thanked her for the experience. It was overwhelming, but also comforting. For years she had been invisible, walking the streets without acknowledgement. Now, people were seeing her, truly seeing her. Not for where she came from or what she lacked, but for the talent and heart she brought into the world. The cafe owner came up and smiled. "I told you," he said softly. "People can feel it. They can see what you carry in your music." She nodded, words failing her. She felt a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. The event had been a challenge, but it had also been transformative. She had stepped out of her comfort zone, faced fear, and discovered that her music had power beyond what she had imagined. That night, she walked back to her temporary shelter, the city lights casting long shadows on the pavement. She clutched her notebook and thought about the day. It had been one of the most intense and rewarding experiences of her life. She realized that life on the streets had given her more than hardship. It had given her depth, motion, and a perspective that enriched her music in ways she could never have learned in comfort. The struggles she faced were painful, yes, but they had shaped her artistry. And that artistry was beginning to be recognized. In the following days, invitations started to come. A small local radio station wanted to feature her. A community center asked if she could play at their next charity event. She was hesitant at first, unsure if she was ready for more attention, but she also felt a growing sense of purpose. Music had always been her refuge, but now it was becoming a bridge. It was connecting her to people who could appreciate her, who could support her, and who could help her find a new path in life. Even so, she remained grounded. She knew that not everything would be easy, and that there were still challenges ahead. The streets were still a reality, her past was still a part of her, and life could still be harsh. But she had discovered a strength she hadn't known she possessed. She had faced fear, shared her music with strangers, and found that people could respond with genuine warmth and respect. That realization gave her courage for the days to come. Each night, she returned to her corner on the streets, playing her small keyboard quietly for herself. But now, there was a difference. She played not only for survival, but with the knowledge that her music could travel farther, touch more hearts, and create opportunities she had never imagined. Her fingers moved over the keys with renewed confidence, her melodies richer and more expressive. She no longer felt like the invisible woman on the street. She was an artist, a storyteller, a musician whose life was beginning to change, and as she played, she dreamed. She dreamed of stages larger than she had ever seen, audiences who listened with open hearts, and a life where she could create without fear. The first step had been terrifying, but it had opened doors she hadn't known existed. Music had always been her voice, and now the world was starting to listen. For the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to believe that the future could be different, so that she could step out of the shadows and into a life shaped by her talent, her passion, and her courage. The day of the community event had finally arrived. She woke before the sun, her heart racing with a mix of excitement and fear. The streets outside were still quiet, the city slowly waking, but her mind was already on the stage, the piano, the audience she would face. She packed her small notebook and keyboard carefully, making sure nothing was left behind. Even after all the recognition she had received at the cafe, the thought of performing for a larger crowd brought a knot of anxiety to her stomach. She had never imagined being in this position, and yet here she was, about to take a step that could change everything. As she walked toward the venue, she tried to steady her nerves. She remembered the weeks on the streets, the cold nights, the hunger, and the loneliness. She thought about the nights spent playing her music alone, letting it carry her through despair and fear. Every note she had practiced, every melody she had written, had led to this moment. She reminded herself that her music was more than notes on a page, it was a story. Her story, and it deserved to be heard. When she arrived, the hall was buzzing with activity. Volunteers were setting up chairs, adjusting lights, and checking sound equipment. Other musicians were practicing in corners, tuning instruments, and whispering to each other. She felt small and out of place among them. Their polished instruments and confident postures made her feel like she didn't belong. But then she took a deep breath, remembering the cafe, remembering the people who had listened to her music, and remembering the small victories she had achieved despite her circumstances. She reminded herself that her talent was her own, and no one could take it from her. Her turn was scheduled for the middle of the program. As she waited backstage, she watched the audience slowly fill the hall. Chairs creaked under the weight of people settling in, murmurs filled the air, and the scent of fresh flowers and polished wood added a warmth to the room. She felt her fingers twitch nervously, and her heart pounded in her chest. What if she made a mistake? What if people didn't like her music? What if they laughed? The fear was overwhelming, but she reminded herself that music had always been her voice. She would speak through it no matter what. Finally, her name was announced. A soft hush fell over the hall as she stepped forward. The polished piano gleamed in the light, its keys pristine and inviting. She felt a wave of emotion, fear, anticipation, and something else she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. She sat down, adjusted her posture, and placed her fingers gently over the keys. For a moment she simply breathed, letting the silence settle over her. Then she began to play. The first notes were soft, tentative, almost hesitant. She could feel every eye in the room on her, every heartbeat listening to her, judging, waiting. But as she continued, the music began to flow naturally, guided by years of practice, struggle, and emotion. Her fingers moved with precision, dancing across the keys, creating melodies that were both haunting and beautiful. Each note carried a story of the streets, of hunger, of nights spent shivering under thin blankets, of dreams that refused to die. As she played, she noticed the audience's reactions. Some were leaning forward, eyes wide, completely absorbed. Others closed their eyes, letting the music wash over them. A few had tears running down their cheeks. She realized that her music was no longer just a private refuge, was a bridge, connecting her experiences to the hearts of strangers. The emotion she poured into each note was being received, felt, and understood. It was a power she had never imagined she could wield. The middle of her performance was the most intense. She let herself remember every hardship, every moment of fear and despair, and transformed it into sound. The piano sang with her pain, her hope, her resilience. The room was silent except for the music, yet it spoke volumes. She noticed the subtle movements of the audience, the way some held their breath, the way others shifted in their seats, moved by something they could not see but could feel deeply. She felt a connection, an unspoken understanding that transcended words, status, and circumstances. Then came the finale. She played with abandon, letting the music swell, rise, and fall like a tide. Her fingers flew across the keys, creating a symphony of sound that seemed to fill every corner of the hall. She felt herself lifting with the music, as if all the weight of the streets, of loneliness, of struggle, were being carried away in each note. She was no longer just a homeless woman playing piano. She was a storyteller, a conductor of emotions, a living embodiment of hope and resilience. When the final note lingered in the air and faded into silence, the audience erupted. Applause thundered through the hall, loud and genuine. Some people stood, clapping and cheering. Others whispered to their neighbors in awe. The sound was overwhelming, almost shocking. She sat frozen for a moment, unable to believe what was happening. People were not just noticing her, they were celebrating her. They were moved by her music, by her story, by her presence. And in that moment, she felt a sense of validation she had never known before. The cafe owner rushed to her side, smiling broadly. "I told you," he said softly. "People can feel it. They can see the heart behind your music." She nodded, tears prickling her eyes. She had always known her music was special, but to have it recognized by others in such a powerful way was beyond anything she had imagined. For the first time, she truly believed that her life could change. After the performance, many people approached her, offering compliments, congratulations, and invitations. A local music teacher offered to mentor her. A small record company wanted to talk, and a charity organization asked if she could perform at their next event. She felt a mix of disbelief and excitement. Opportunities she had never dared to imagine were now opening before her. And yet, she remained grounded, remembering the streets that had shaped her. The nights she had spent practicing alone, the moments of fear she had overcome. Every step she had taken had led her to this point, and she knew that humility and persistence would carry her further. That evening, as she walked back to her temporary shelter, she felt a sense of peace she had not experienced in years. The city lights glowed warmly, reflecting on wet pavement, casting a soft shine on the streets she had once thought cold and unforgiving. She played quiet melodies on her small keyboard as she walked, a private celebration of her achievement. Music had given her not only survival, but a chance to connect, to shine, and to dream beyond the limits imposed by her circumstances as she thought about the people she had touched with her performance. The young girl in the cafe who had been inspired to sketch, the strangers at the hall who had been moved to tears, the volunteers who had smiled at her courage, all of them were part of her journey now. Music had become a language she could use to reach people, to share her experiences, and to inspire hope. She realized that talent, when combined with persistence and courage, could break barriers, even the invisible walls that society often places around someone like her. Over the following weeks, her life began to change subtly but significantly. She was invited to perform at more events, each one larger and more formal than the last. She began to receive small offers of support, donations for lessons, opportunities to borrow instruments, and introductions to people who could help her develop her talent further. The streets were still part of her life, but they were no longer her only reality. She was building a bridge to a new world, one note at a time, one performance at a time. Yet she never forgot where she had come from. The streets, the cold nights, the hunger, and the isolation had all shaped her music and her character. They had taught her resilience, humility, and empathy. She carried these lessons into every performance, letting her experiences color the music she played. And in doing so, she reminded herself and others that even in the darkest circumstances, beauty, hope, and talent could emerge. One evening, after another performance, she sat quietly in her corner of the streets, playing a soft melody on her small keyboard. The city was calm, the lights reflected gently on puddles from an earlier rain, and the world felt almost peaceful. She thought about the journey she had taken, how fear had almost held her back, how doubt had almost silenced her, and how courage had allowed her music to reach the hearts of others. She realized that her talent was not just about music. It was about perseverance, about finding light in darkness, and about sharing that light with the world. Her life was still far from perfect, and the streets would always be a part of her story. But for the first time, she believed in possibility. She believed in herself. And she believed that no matter how difficult the path, there was a way to rise, to be seen, and to be appreciated for the gift she had carried all along. The applause, the tears, and the smiles she had earned were not just for her music. They were a recognition of her spirit, her courage, and the journey that had brought her to that piano. And as she played that quiet melody, letting it drift into the night, she felt a profound sense of connection to the people she had touched, to the music that had carried her through hardship, and to the life that was beginning to unfold before her. She realized that every struggle, every cold night, every moment of doubt had led to this, a moment where her talent, her heart, and her courage had converged to create something beautiful, something lasting, and something that would change her life forever. After the performance at the community event, her life began to shift in ways she had never imagined. The applause, the tears, and the smiles had left a mark, not just on her, but on the people who had witnessed her music. Invitations started coming in from small community centers, local charities, and even schools. At first, she was hesitant. The idea of stepping into another room full of strangers, of being the center of attention, still made her nervous. But she reminded herself of that first performance, the way the music had flowed, the way people had listened, the way she had felt alive. Each invitation was a new chance to share her story and her gift. A music teacher who had attended one of her performances approached her and offered to give her free lessons. She was surprised and grateful. For years she had practiced in isolation, teaching herself from scraps of sheet music and her own intuition. Now she would have guidance, someone to help refine her talent and push her further. The lessons began slowly, filled with corrections, advice, and encouragement. Sometimes she made mistakes and felt embarrassed. But the teacher's patience and belief in her reminded her that learning and growing were part of the journey. Word of her talent began to spread through the city. A small local newspaper ran a story about the homeless woman whose music had moved audiences. She read it quietly at the library one afternoon, her fingers trembling slightly. The words on the page described her struggle, her resilience, and the way her music had touched the hearts of strangers. For the first time, she felt a sense of recognition that had nothing to do with pity. People were beginning to see her for what she could give, not for what she had lost. The street that had been her home for so long began to feel different. Walking past the corner she once claimed, she noticed people nodding in acknowledgement, offering small smiles, sometimes even a warm greeting. She had never expected the world to change because of her, yet it had begun to shift in small, meaningful ways. Her music had opened doors, but it had also opened hearts. People who had once walked past without a glance were now listening, noticing, and appreciating. It was a reminder that even small acts of courage could create ripples far beyond what she could see. One afternoon, she received a call from a local event coordinator. They wanted her to perform at a charity concert for children in need. The thought of performing for an audience full of kids made her nervous, but excited. Children, she realized, were honest in their reactions. They laughed, clapped, cried, and smiled without hesitation. They would not judge her, only feel the music as she played it. She prepared carefully, choosing pieces that were expressive yet playful, gentle yet full of emotion. The day of the concert arrived. She stepped onto the stage with a mixture of anxiety and anticipation. The children's faces lit up as she played. Some leaned forward, their eyes wide with curiosity, while others bounced slightly in their seats, captivated by the melodies. She allowed herself to play freely, pouring all her emotion into the music, letting it flow naturally from her fingers. She saw smiles, heard laughter, and even noticed a few children humming along. The experience reminded her of the joy of music, the way it could connect people, inspire hope, and create happiness in a world that often felt heavy after the concert. Several parents approached her, praising her talent and thanking her for sharing it with the children. One mother even mentioned that her daughter had been inspired to start piano lessons of her own. The thought filled her heart with warmth. Music, she realized, was more than a way to survive, was a way to touch lives, to inspire and to leave a lasting impact. She had spent so long thinking of her music as a private escape, but now she understood its true power, the ability to bring people together, to heal and to create hope where it was needed most. With each performance, her confidence grew. The streets were still part of her life, but they no longer defined her existence. She began to find small places to stay, friends who offered temporary shelter, and eventually a modest apartment that she could call her own. It wasn't luxurious, but it was safe, warm, and hers. She could finally sleep without fear of the cold or the uncertainty of where her next meal would come from. For the first time in years, she felt a sense of stability, foundation from which she could build the life she had always dreamed of. Her music continued to evolve. She experimented with new compositions, blending styles she had learned from the streets, the cafe, and the lessons she had received. Each piece reflected her journey, her struggles, her triumphs, her fears, and her hopes. She played not only for audiences, but for herself, allowing the music to remain a refuge, a friend, and a source of joy. The piano had become an extension of her soul, a way to communicate with the world when words were not enough. Opportunities continued to grow. A local radio station invited her to perform live on air. A small theater asked if she would play at their upcoming community showcase. She accepted each offer cautiously, still mindful of her past experiences, yet eager to see how far her talent could take her. Every new stage, every new audience reinforced the lesson she had learned on the streets, that courage, persistence, and belief in oneself could create change, even in the most unlikely circumstances. Despite the recognition and growing opportunities, she never forgot the streets where she had lived. She returned occasionally to play quietly in familiar corners, not for money or applause, but to remember where she had come from. She would sometimes see the faces of people who were still struggling, their eyes reflecting the same fear, loneliness, and uncertainty she had once carried. She offered encouragement, shared music, and reminded them that even in hardship, there was hope. Her journey had not erased the pain of the past, but it had transformed it into a story of resilience, strength, and possibility. She also began mentoring others who shared her love for music. Children and teenagers from difficult backgrounds came to her for lessons, eager to learn and inspired by her story. She taught them not only the technical aspects of playing, but also the emotional depth of music, the way it could express feelings, tell stories, and connect with others. Seeing their progress, their joy, and their growing confidence gave her a sense of fulfillment she had never experienced before. She realized that her music had become a legacy, a way to touch lives beyond her own. One evening, she performed at a small charity gala. The hall was filled with people who had heard her story, and many were there to support her directly. She played with a confidence she had never known, her fingers moving effortlessly across the keys. The audience was captivated, their applause and cheers echoing long after she had finished. But the most profound moment came after the performance, when a young woman approached her with tears in her eyes. "Your music saved me," she whispered. "It reminded me that I can get through anything." The words struck her deeply. She had always played for herself, for survival, and for expression. But hearing that her music could have such an impact on someone else made her realize its true power. As the years passed, her life continued to improve. She secured a stable apartment, continued her lessons, and performed regularly at various events. She had a circle of friends and mentors who supported her, and she remained grounded, remembering the streets and the challenges that had shaped her. Music remained central to her existence, not just as a career or a talent, but as a way to connect, inspire, and heal. Looking back, she realized how far she had come. From the cold streets and uncertain nights, from hunger and fear, she had emerged into a life filled with possibility, recognition, and purpose. The journey had not been easy. There had been moments of doubt, fear, and loneliness, but every struggle had strengthened her. Every obstacle had taught her resilience, and every note she had played had brought her closer to the life she had dreamed of. She often reflected on the moments that had changed everything. The cafe owner who had seen her talent, the first audience that had listened with genuine attention, and the community event that had shown her the power of sharing her gift. Those moments had been small at the time, but they had created a chain of opportunities that transformed her existence. She realized that courage, persistence, and belief in oneself could create change in ways she had never imagined. Her story became an inspiration for many. People who heard about her journey saw that even in the darkest circumstances, it was possible to rise, to be seen, and to achieve dreams that once seemed impossible. She spoke at schools, performed at charity events, and shared her experience with those who needed hope. Her life was a testament to the idea that talent, when combined with resilience and determination, could open doors that seemed forever closed. And through it all, she remained humble. She never forgot the streets, the cold nights, or the moments of despair that had shaped her. She remembered the small victories, the kind gestures, and the few people who had believed in her when no one else would. Those memories kept her grounded, reminding her that success was not just about recognition or opportunity, but about staying true to oneself, sharing one's gifts, and continuing to grow despite challenges. Her music continued to evolve. Reflecting her journey, her emotions, and her experiences, she composed new pieces that told stories of hope, resilience, and transformation. Each performance was a reminder of how far she had come, how much she had overcome, and how much further she could go. Music was no longer just a refuge, it was a bridge, a way to connect, inspire, and create change in the world. And so, from the cold streets where she had once struggled to survive, to the stages where she now performed to appreciative audiences, her journey became a story of hope, courage, and triumph. She had faced fear, uncertainty, and doubt, yet she had risen above it all. Her talent had been recognized, her heart had been seen, and her music had touched lives in ways she had never imagined. She had found stability, purpose, and a community that valued her for who she was. In the quiet moments, when she played alone in her apartment or on a small stage, she thought about her journey. The struggles, the music, the people who had helped, and the moments that had changed everything. She realized that life was not just about surviving, but about rising, about sharing, and about creating something meaningful. Music had given her that chance, and she embraced it fully. Her story was no longer one of just hardship. It was a story of resilience, talent, and hope. She had transformed her life through courage, persistence, and the power of music. And in doing so, she had shown the world that even the most unlikely person, facing the most difficult circumstances, could create beauty, inspire others, and find a life filled with possibility, respect, and joy.